Okay, I'm here with Ethan Hansen. Really grateful that he sat down to talk with us today. And Ethan, why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about your experience with church media, since that's the topic of today's episode, and then we'll get into the questions that we had specifically for you.
Sure. Well, I started working in my church sound booth. My dad's a pastor of our church back in Atchison, Kansas. I started doing that when I was about 10 or 11. Our youth pastor managed the sound booth, and he had 5 or 6 teens that he would bring in, and we'd rotate Sundays and Wednesday nights, just running the audio channels, the slides for the message, pre-roll announcements, and things like that. So I did that through junior high and high school. And when I was about to graduate high school, I got the opportunity to work at the Wilds on the AV crew. I think summer of 2015, which was quite a step up from running the soundboard at my little church back in Kansas. And that kind of opened my eyes to kind of the larger view of church media. And that was the point when I realized I wanted to really have an impact on the way media was used in churches at large, going on through the rest of my life.
Yeah. Working at camp only enhances what you've already learned, I think, and kind of opens more doors, or it kind of exposes you to what you didn't know. So
yeah.
That's a good experience for everybody. Okay, well, I guess the first question I have for you is, and we can kind of get into more of those things as we go along, but what is the best way for me if I'm creating art, if I'm creating media, how can I use that to help my church? What's the best way to, I guess, get started doing that?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about that a lot since you emailed me that question. And I would say that the first thing is to be cautious about how you use media. It needs to be subservient to the gospel, subservient to the presentation. Something that Andy Angel, my supervisor at the Wilds, taught me in our training was, whatever you do not disrupt the presentation of the gospel. And at first I took that a little bit too seriously. I took it a little too much to heart. I had a great deal of anxiety surrounding whether I would be responsible for interrupting a gospel message, and whether that could potentially, cause in this case, a child at camp to not be able to hear the word. And I mistakenly brought in the passage of scripture that says, better is it for him that a millstone was hung around his neck and he was cast into the sea. So I do not recommend interpreting the passage in that way. I believe now that if it's your intent and your desire to augment and be a channel, so to speak, for the gospel and anything you do with church media, that the Lord will honor that. We can't take that application too far, but I believe that is the case. So just use that as a ground rule. And there's so much I could say about this. For a lot of years, all I was doing was working with church audio, and I was very concerned about finding the clearest and best way, in a technical sense, to not magnify the voice, but just make the voice clear for every hearer to hear. Because in stagecraft and in audio tech, if no one can tell that there's amplification being used, that's perfect.
Right.
That's what you want.
It is the ultimate, when things are going well, no one should know you're there.
Exactly.
And when things are going wrong, everyone's going to blame you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the AV engineer's creed. Yeah. And I remember, you'll remember this, because at the time we were thinking of working on some short films back then. And I was really starting to get into the visual space as well. I didn't know what graphic design was at the time. I was just a kid messing around with Photoshop on my computer. And I tried to do a lot in our church to kind of bring up the visual quality that we had for our announcement slides and some video presentations and some things we would do with a Christmas program or a pageant to have animations or cinemagraphs playing during the program. Though I didn't realize it at the time, a lot of that distracts from the presentation of the gospel, and so that would be another word of warning. Whatever you do, don't jump the shark with the media you're using to present. Remember, you always want it to be subservient to the message.
No, that's good. That's good. So in that vein, you said you kind of worked with audio, then you were moving over to visual. What tools would you recommend for someone? Maybe they're still in high school, or maybe they're in college and they are in graphic design school, but are there any specific tools or one or two things you could think of that would help someone if they were to go to their church and say, I want to use this to make, audio, video, still images, whatever it might be, to enhance the church's ministry?
Well, I'm gonna start with a little bit of a technical thing, but to me, when I learned about it, it's invaluable. It's a tool called a switcher scaler. Are you familiar with this tool?
I am not.
Okay.
Switcher scaler?
A switcher scaler. So it's a box that I won't go into how you're going to go about configuring it. You'll probably have to look that up if this is unfamiliar to you. But basically, what it does is it gives you a set of analog switches to let you switch exactly what visual channel is going out to your screen. And I've been at so many churches where suddenly the media computer restarts in the middle of the service, and you've got the Windows logo and sometimes the reboot sound, and that's like, please do not let that happen in your service. That's breaking your ground rule to not disrupt the service. And having an analog tool like that, where you can just press a button and immediately switch from computer to black screen, no digital audio, is invaluable. I use that a lot at the Wilds whenever there's always going to be a hiccup of some kind coming up like that, especially with the more moving parts and the more sophistication you have in your system. So I highly recommend that tool. You can get them pretty inexpensively, but that is a we still don't actually use one of these at my church back home, just because we have a simple enough system that we can regulate. We don't have to worry about that too much. But as soon as you introduce any complexity, I highly recommend getting a switcher scaler so you can just immediately switch off the digital channels if you need to and prevent distraction. In the software space, PowerPoint is going to be your friend for probably 90% of situations, and you might be trying to take your stuff to the next level, but really before a certain point, maybe before you've got a church of 300 and you're really trying, you have the budget to move up to a more sophisticated system, PowerPoint is a really underrated tool, and more than 90% of the time you're going to have access to it in perpetuity. There's great training for it. I hated PowerPoint for a lot of years, and then I was required to use it at BW Press for animation for a whole year.
Wow.
Just PowerPoint. I created hours and hours and hours of animations in PowerPoint, and I realized just how powerful and reliable of a tool it is.
So I was going to divert a little bit. Take me through this. You're creating each slide as a frame of animation, or you're using the PowerPoint built-in animation?
I'm using the built-in tools to animate with, and there are some surprising nuggets of powerful tools in there if you bang your head against it long enough. I will say the user experience is pretty bad when you're trying to use it for more complicated stuff, but it is there, and it will serve you well.
That's good to know.
Yep.
PowerPoint, and that usually comes on any computer you would sit down at a church would have PowerPoint on it.
Yeah.
Because it's part of the Office suite.
If you have an educational license, I mean, you can bring that with you in a lot of cases. And I don't think our church has ever needed to pay for Microsoft Office, and that's nothing to sneeze at, especially when you start looking at even the lowest end presentation software like a Pro Presenter, Media Shout, stuff like that. It's all good, but it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars a year in licensing. And for most churches, under a certain congregational size threshold, what you can support at that level of giving, you really don't want to introduce a cost like that for the level of usefulness you're going to get out of it, because it's really not going to pay for itself for a good bit, much less the hardware you'll need to go along with it, as you can imagine, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, that's really comforting to know that if you have a desire to get into it, you're not going to need to go out and pay for Adobe Suite or, you want to wait until you have the need for Adobe Suite before you would put the money down, and you can just use the tools that are there if you're driven enough and creative enough to find.
Yeah, absolutely.
Find ways around it.
These are tools that I'm still not super familiar with, but I'm learning more and more about services that kind of bundle, graphic design and video elements for churches, and you can either get them for free or for a small, subscription, and that way you don't need to worry about the graphic design much. You just kind of plug in the data from your bulletin and the song slides and CCLI and stuff like that is something you'll need to worry about a little bit, but
that's the music copyright, right?
Yes.
CCLI. Okay.
Yeah. Once you start presenting on screen above a certain, I think it might be like 150 people in your church threshold, something like that. You'll need to register with a Christian music copyright. I guess they're an agency, so to speak. They'll give you a number, and you kind of pay an annual license fee. I don't know a whole lot about this. My sister does a lot of the CCLI stuff for the university, so she knows way more than I do.
Okay.
I kind of have never looked into it that much myself, but that's something you'll want to pay attention to, because you don't want to start using, especially more modern songs that have been written in the last 50 years that are still under copyright. And you don't want to be using those songs without licensing them from the artist. I think you can sing them to a certain point when you've just purchased the music, but if you're going to be presenting them on screen, that is something you'll want to look into. Interesting.
Well, I have one more official question for you, but before that, I have an unofficial question that I didn't prepare you for. But I know if you guys want to follow him on Twitter, he's a kind of a software. You really talk about a lot on Twitter. You get into Adobe and Blender and different operating or software systems. So, are there any that you're watching for the future? Maybe is a good thing to start. If you're in college and you have some time during the summer, you can take a online course or something. Is there anything you'd recommend in that space to burgeoning graphic designers or media creators?
Well, at the really introductory end, I cannot recommend Canva highly enough. Canva, CANVA, so like Canvas minus the S, is a cloud-based graphic design tool, analogous to Photoshop, but it's free to use. There's a premium tier if you want some more advanced editing features and storage and stuff like that, but it's really high performing, so even if you're working on a potato laptop or a Chromebook, you can get really good performance out of it. It's really built for intuitiveness. There's a lot of training available for it if you want to do more complicated things. But if you need some more advanced editing tools, the Photoshop photographer plan is something that's been around for close to a decade now, if I remember right. And that gives you Photoshop and Lightroom for $10 a month, which is really hard to beat, especially if you're just using it on a short-term basis or a trial basis, extended trial basis. you cannot beat $10 a month for that software. No matter what comes along, Photoshop is the dominant, desktop graphics software you need for this kind of thing, and will be for a couple of years yet. I highly recommend that. A Creative Suite, if you're not in school, is going to cost you around $50 a month, and that's something you really don't want to be paying on an extended basis if you don't need to. I'm trying to remember the name of that Photoshop competitor. I don't use it a whole lot, but it only costs $50 one time. You don't happen to know what I'm talking about, do you?
I don't. I'm sorry.
The name is not coming to my mind right now.
It's not a competitor for Adobe Suite. It's a competitor for Photoshop itself.
Well, it is competing with Adobe Suite now. They have an Illustrator competitor. They have an InDesign competitor, which is huge.
It's not DaVinci?
No, DaVinci Resolve is good. That's a really good tool. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
If you need to do nonlinear editing, so timeline editing for video up to a pretty high scale, DaVinci Resolve is an incredible tool that Blackmagic recently made available for free, and I highly recommend downloading it and working with it if you need something that's an alternative to Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro or something like that, and you really can't get in to those environments without laying down a good chunk of change. And DaVinci Resolve has an incredible hardware performance even on a low performing machine, so highly recommend that. The Canva, I cannot remember the name of the tool. Maybe we can put that up later.
Yeah.
And if you want to get into 3D software, there has never been a time better than now to get into it. The Blender Foundation released version 2.82 of Blender just a week or two ago. At the time of recording this, 2.8 was a huge landmark for the software. When I started it 10 years ago now, it was really incomparable to what we have now. It was extremely difficult to use. It was infamous for its lack of user friendliness. Even 10 years later, I still don't know everything in the app. I'm not sure anyone really does besides the core developers. Maybe not even them. So it's a full suite of 3D software that's analogous to Autodesk software, but it's open source and free forever. I've never had to pay a cent. I've donated to the Blender Foundation out of gratitude a couple of times, but there is so much you can do with it, and even a lot of animation studios and VFX houses are moving exclusively to Blender as a creation suite because it saves them. In some cases, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year in software costs, and for a tool that is developing day by day according to what they need and according to what is really out there. So if you want to get into 3D, Blender 2.8 with a redesigned interface and with better feature set than ever is a great place to start.
Cool. Well, we probably should have you back on to talk about software more. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of what you're into there. But you've touched on this a little bit at the beginning, and I just wanted to ask you before we close, but maybe what is the biggest pitfall to avoid if I were to go to my church and say, hey, I want to help you guys create some visual graphics or some video or anything like that? Is there any big thing? I know you touched on not distracting from the message and that sort of thing, but is there anything else that I should try to avoid if I were to go and do that tomorrow?
I would be very careful I would make sure to avoid introducing change too quickly. So it's kind of a classic scenario in especially fundamental churches.
Yes.
There's carpet change or something like that, and the church splits over it. And that isn't something that has actually happened for a long time, but everyone still talks about it. So we know there's some measure of reality to it.
Yeah.
If you go in and change the way a church does their bulletin in a week or in a couple of weeks, watch out, because consistency is something that is a huge part of churches. And when you go in and think you're making a change for the better, no matter how small it is, be very cautious, be very circumspect when you do that, because it'll be difficult to foresee all of what will accompany that. So do it prayerfully whenever you introduce a change, especially the younger you are. I was full of good ideas when I was young and crazy.
Yeah.
I'm only 23 now, but I mean it was 13 years ago when
Right.
I started doing this, and I look back and wince at some of the things I was recommending we do now. But talk to whoever does the bulletin at your church, whoever's responsible for that, the content in it, the printing and folding or whatever is being done, and find out from them, how they get the information in it every week, how people use it. Start from the ground up. Start from the basics. Find what information people need and help deliver that to them in the most convenient way possible. The most convenient way for you to get information is probably very different from someone who's 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, or older. And you want to consider all of those people when you introduce a change like that. It could be as simple as changing from a bulletin to having morning announcement slides and an announcement email, sending out prayer requests by email, or an app. I really have to recommend an app called Services. I forget the company that makes it, but we use it at our fairly small church of around 200 to schedule musicians for all of our services. I love it. I haven't had to think a great deal besides I get an email notification every couple of weeks that gives me some lead time. Like, all right, we'd like you to prepare an offertory for 2 or 3 weeks from now, and it gives you the order of service and the hymn numbers and everything like that. Peter Angel, who happens to be the brother of Andy Angel, who I worked for at the Wilds, he started an app last year called Doxology, which is an online hymnody service, which I highly recommend checking that out.
How's that spelled?
Doxology.
Okay.
Sort of like the doxology, exactly like the doxology. But say if you're looking up a song, the library is fairly limited right now since it was just introduced last year. But you can look up a song on there. It's a progressive web app, so it's very responsive, very quick. You can look up a song on there. You can have everyone in your church look it up on their phone if you want a digital hymn solution. And it gives you lyrics, music, and a lead sheet, chording if you want to sing and accompany on a guitar. So that's a tool I'm very interested to watch develop in the next couple of years.
Yeah, that sounds pretty.
And like it's free.
And it's free. Okay.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like a good solution for something that is a need. Mm-hmm. Like that is definitely a need. Even could be used in youth groups or that sort of thing, where you've got the app and the kids are all on their phones already, and whether you want them to be or not. So doxology, that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Well, Ethan, I'm really glad that you sat down with us, and I hope we can have you back again in the future. And I hope we stay connected, because there may or may not be a short film upcoming again that we have a better plan for and a better idea of how to execute. But where can people find you? I know you have an Instagram with your designs, and then a Twitter, your personal Twitter, where you like to... here it is. Oh yeah, I saw you working on these. But Hansen House Studio, hansenhouse.studio on Instagram. Hansen, hansenhouse.studio. And then it's just your name on Twitter, right?
It's at, what is it right now? I changed it a while back. I think it's at Hansen_house on Twitter.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you again, Ethan. I really do appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot already just today listening to you. And hopefully we can, like I said, have you on again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it.